Welcome back to the wood shop. My name's Brett. If you want to see how I built this dust shroud for my sliding compound miter saw, stick around. This video is going to be part one of a 2 or maybe 3-part series on upgrading my miter saw station. I'll show you how I built this dust shroud in phase 1. The follow-up video or videos will be completing the dust shroud by closing in the miter saw with dry erase whiteboard panels, and I'm also going to be routing a groove in the countertop for a T-track stop block system for repeatable cuts. And the last couple of months of 2021 I spent building this cabinets and countertop to add some side support for the table saw, also side support for the router table. It includes a removable top so I can swing up the planer. Which is very heavy and I don't want to be lifting it off the floor all the time. So I'm still working on a support for that, but it does work. There we go. Also provide some extra storage underneath, and one of the main things I needed it for was this permanent miter saw station. There's lots to do, so let's get started. But first, I've got to clean up the storage mess behind it so I can get back there to work. This miter saw that I have is a beast. It can do a lot, but it takes up a lot of room. It's a sliding compound miter saw, so it goes in every direction. This is the R4221 from Ridgid, with a 12-inch blade, and it slides. If you expand these, oh, let me get this out of the way. And you expand the wings. In this direction we can go all the way up to 70 degrees for a miter cut. And this way I'm running into my cabinet top, so I can only hit 60 degrees. And then the reason it's compound is because it can do bevel cuts too. So miter and bevel at the same time for those. The only time you'd really need that is for like doing crown molding or molding around the house. There may be applications in the kind of woodworking that I do, but not a lot. Most cuts are 90 degrees. So you can lock those on preset stops at 0, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees of course, and 60 degrees. So generally with the wings shut, I can get to a 45 degree miter in either direction. But because it's so big, and because I had this nice little alcove under the stairs, I decided to use this as my spot. It's not ideal. I only have, well, I don't have a measuring tape, but it's about a yard from the blade to the wall. So my offcuts can't be super long, but I've got more than 10 feet on the other end. So I'll make that work. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of just how much the dust kicks out and goes everywhere. I'll bring you in a little bit closer. To show you how dusty it gets, I'm going to cut up some MDF, which produces a lot of fine dust. But first, safety. I don't want to breathe this stuff. And it's loud. Okay. That's without the vacuum hose. Now I'll hook up the vacuum hose, which just goes in the back here. And I don't need this to slide. All right, let's see if the vacuum hose makes any difference. Could you tell the difference? I couldn't. I don't really have a plan for this build. My plan is just to use up a bunch of scraps that I have laying around the shop. So I'm just going to take measurements and build some sort of framework and then attach whatever sheet goods I can find. It doesn't have to look pretty, it just needs to work. Here I'm just ripping this wider pine board down into framing pieces that are big enough to hold a couple of screws on the end. Now I'm setting up my sliding bevel gauge so I can transfer that angle to the miter gauge on the table saw to cut the framing cross piece. I could also have made this cut on the miter saw, I suppose, but since I don't have dust collection on the miter saw yet, I went with the table saw. I don't use this miter gauge very often, probably because I have a miter saw. But in this project it was the perfect tool to use because I could just leave that angle set up in case I needed to make other cuts the angle of the stairway. Of course, now that I say that, I'm changing it back to 90 degrees. I think because I didn't want to lug out my big honkin' crosscut sled for this little part. Once again, I could have made this cut on the miter saw, but, you know, no dust collection. As I'm building this frame structure, I want to make sure that my saw can make it through all of its range of motion, that it can swing completely from side to side and tilt, and all the motions that it can do. I don't want to interfere with any of that. I'm also thinking about, there's a little bit of space back here that I can use for storage, so I want to be able to get through here and get behind and get things back out if I need to. So I don't want this box to be in my way of getting back behind it for the little bit of storage that is back there. I want to make full use of my shop. Let me take you back here and show you kind of what I'm up against. So I've just got this little space here under the stairs that I'm trying to maximize and make use of in this giant machine that needs dust collection around it. So I'm contending with these angles and different levels to kind of wall in. I want to build some sort of floor here with a dust port, or like a vacuum port, to create the suction. And I want to be able to, boy, it's hard to even get back far enough to get a good view of this because it's such a small space, but I want to be able to get around this, like I said, for using this for a little bit of storage, whatever I can manage. And then there's going to be this big box shroud also taking up this space. But I also want to keep in mind that I'm trying to leave space open underneath it for storage as well. I realize the box is going to have some weight to it and I need that to be supported, so what I'm considering doing is attaching some like cantilevered shelf supports to the cabinet box there to support the weight of this shroud. So that's your sneak peek behind the miter saw. Here's a little tip: when you're gluing the end of a board to something, the end grain acts like little straws that suck the glue in, so the glue actually kind of leaves the joint if you don't do this preparation step. So just take and add a bead of glue and then smear it around and work it in into the end grain. Push it in there and then just wipe it off and let it sit for a bit, and then add another bead of glue when you're about ready to do your final glue up. I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to add some glue to this end grain, wipe it in, push it down in there. And I got it worked in. And add some more. Spread that around a bit. And we'll go back to my angled piece that's going up against the frame member there. Okay, and then I'm adding 2.5 inch pocket screws. I hope they stay there. Not 2.5, I'm sorry, 1.5. I actually do have 2.5 that I'm adding over here, but I'll do that next. So okay, get this clamped up. And when you're doing pocket hole screws, you really do want to clamp them down pretty good, especially when you have glue in the joint. The wood wants to slide around, and even without glue, the screws want to push it in the direction that they're going. So if you've got it clamped in exactly the right place where you want it, snug that down, and then we're still looking good over here. Yep, that's all right, ready to go. This, by the way, is one method you can use to make picture frames, is pocket hole screws and glue. And basically that's what this is. It's a picture frame. So now I'm going to add these 2.5 inch screws, and the reason they need to be longer is because obviously we're going into more material, and there's plenty behind there to grab onto, unlike if you were, joining two pieces of 3/4 inch material. We want this to go pretty deep because this is going to be supporting some weight with the paneling that goes behind. So I want to make sure this is pretty secure. All right, got those preloaded. I don't really have a way to clamp this together, I'm just gonna hold it in the place where I want it and drive the screws and hope for the best. For the next part of the frame, I'm gonna extend this box around the corner. I want two pieces of equal length at 16 inches. So first we're gonna square off this end, and then we'll measure out 16 inches. These are the two pieces I just cut at 16 inches. And then these are going to be the top and the bottom of the next frame portion that I want to make. And then this will be sandwiched in between them. And I want the finished height to be 20 inches. So an easy way to measure that out is to just put these two together, put this piece up against it, and then just measure the whole thing at 20 inches and mark that. I'm just going to keep my pencil there, grab my little square, and mark it off. Now we're ready to cut that down to size. I was very fortunate to still have this 2 foot by 4 foot panel of 1/2 inch MDF in my shop. It was the perfect size to use for the floor of this dust shroud. I'm still not sure what to call this thing. Dust shroud, dust hood, box thingy. I also had this vacuum attachment that I never used. They sell vacuum attachments specifically for this kind of thing that you can just screw to the bottom of a rectangular hole. But since I'm not making money with woodworking just yet, I try to be as resourceful as I can and use what I have. I'm building on a budget here after all. Not sure what to say about this part. This is kind of self-explanatory. I'm just laying out where I need to make my cuts to make this board fit into place. I've been told I have mad measuring skills. Enjoy. This was a custom fit, so there was a lot of back and forth trimming with various hand tools and power tools to get a good fit. I almost cut into my countertop. That would have made me pretty upset. Off camera, I used my palm router to cut a rabbet along one side and a 45-degree chamfer along the other side.
Two hours later.
Now what I'm doing is getting ready to make a plunge cut on the table saw. I had to remove the riving knife to do this. Notice the little yellow plastic piece has been removed, which prevents the saw from accidentally being turned on. Safety first. This cut could also have been made with a jigsaw or a circular saw, but the table saw gives me the cleanest and straightest cut with better dust collection and fairly easy setup. If you're not comfortable with this kind of cut on the table saw, then use one of those other methods. Next we move on to making the cantilevered shelf supports that will support the dust shroud from underneath. I learned this method from Matthias Wandel on his YouTube channel called Wood Gears. I hope I'm saying his name right. I'll leave a link to his video on cantilevers if you want to take a deep dive into how to make them and how they work. But basically it's just some framing members made into a right triangle and sandwiched between two pieces of sheet material, OSB in my case. I wanted to clamp it up so I could drill some pilot holes for easier installation later. You'll see what I mean in a second. I then took the short leg of the triangle and screwed it into place on the back of the miter saw station. Notice that I had already taken a piece that was the same thickness as the long leg of the triangle and clamped it to the cabinet at just the right height so that the MDF panel would sit flush with the tabletop once installed. Then it was just a matter of attaching the frame members to the OSB panels, using glue and brad nails. Actually, this is a headless pin nailer that I'm using. I had cut extra short legs so that I could use them for spacers, but not install them at this step. I had to use my man strength to move the saw out of the way so I could put the pipe clamps where I needed them in order to hold the shelf supports while I glued and screwed them into place. I can't think of anything to say about this part, so enjoy some music while you watch. Did you know that you can change the shape of PVC pipe to make it a little smaller or a little larger in diameter? All you need is a little heat. Make sure you wear gloves when you're doing this. I added some steel netting to the vacuum port to prevent any bigger chunks from getting caught in the 2-inch pipe, and set it permanently in place with construction adhesive. Now we move on to fitting panels, which will make up the rest of this dust hood. Here's an interesting little factoid. I actually got to use a compound cut on the miter saw for making this dust shroud. See in that back corner there? The angle of the stairs and the angle of where those two pieces meet is actually a compound angle to get it to fit snugly. And happily I was able to accomplish that on my compound miter saw with like a 47 degree. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm not taking specific measurements. I'm not that nerdy. But then it's also a bevel. There. I don't know if you can tell that on the camera angle. But you get the idea. Both a bevel and a miter to make that corner fit nice. That's exciting for me. This bevel gauge is useful, but it has its limits. I also have one of these, a miter angle finder, that can help you make miter cuts with either a single cut or a double cut. It's got 2 measuring scales to divide that up. And what I'm using this for is where the panels of the miter shroud come together. This thing is full of angles, and it's a real puzzle. But the advantage of this thing is it actually gives me a number. So this is the angle where 2 panels are coming together on the roof of the shroud. So now that I have a number, I can use this digital angle finder to set the saw blade so that I can run my panel through and put a bevel on that edge where the 2 panels meet. And the way this thing works is you just turn it on. I'll show you the display screen, and then you zero it on the reference surface. Is it zeroed? I can't see. Okay, and then I'm gonna do it so I can see it. I'm gonna zero it, and then it's magnetic, so you can attach it to the saw blade, and then I can change my angle until I get where I need it to be, which is 75 degrees in this case, or 15 degrees off of square. There we go. This video is getting to be a lot longer than I thought it would be. I'm going to have to make this build into a 2 or 3 part series because there's still lots to do before this will work as a dust hood. If you stuck around this far, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it and found some useful ideas for your own shop. Let me know in the comments what you found to be of value. And if you like this content, make sure you let YouTube know by clicking the like button. Ooh, that's satisfying. As you can see, this dust shroud isn't going to work very well without some panels on the front side to finish closing in the miter saw. I'm going to use dry erase board for that so I can keep track of my measurements. I'm also going to route out a groove in the countertop for a T-track stop block system. That way I can make repeatable cuts. Another feature I'd like to add is a flip-up table on this other side for material support, but then it can also fold down out of the way so I can get behind for that little bit of storage. I'll release those videos as they come and provide links for you once they're published. Until next time, my friends, be safe and love each other. If you want to see how I built this, so then I can use this digital angle finder to, what do I want to say? If you want to see how I built this dust shroud for my Ridgid sliding compound miter saw, whew, that's a mouthful.